Hi everyone, you may know that recently I've been working on a lighting product for Blender. I did a video going over it recently talking about the development, what the purpose is, and the kinds of things it will be useful for. The thing is, this product was supposed to be done, well, pretty much at the end of January, and obviously we're in March now. Basically what happened is, I have a knack for stumbling into really complicated medical issues. I promise I'm not doing it intentionally, it just seems that I'm predisposed to complicated things, but it's really slowed down the process. So what I'm doing now is, because there's been so much attention for the work I've been sharing, particularly on Twitter, I'm taking a limited amount of the stuff that's already done on the product and I'm releasing it early in the form of a startup file, which I'm going to show you today. Basically contains a collection of different lighting templates and things to help you get really nice starting points for your projects. This is not free, this will be paid, and the reason is I also want to raise money for my medical consultation fees. Now I'll share some more specifics later on in the video, but just to keep it very short for those of you that don't really care about the personal side of things, I injured my right cornea at the beginning of February. It seems to have healed, but pain and sensations persisted, which is in line with kind of neuralgic issues. It's quite a difficult thing to diagnose. My regular optician was pretty much useless, even though he's a pretty nice person. They had no idea what's going on. A nurse at urgent care also noted that it was weird, but they also had no idea what's going on, so I have to go to a specialist now in London, and that obviously can get quite expensive. So that's why this startup file with all of the content I'm going to show you is $20. I've got it set to at the moment. I'm also trying not to undervalue the stuff I make anymore because it has kind of shot me in the foot over the years. So I know it's going to upset people, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you like the content that's in here so you can also recreate it if you wanted to, even though it'll be quite difficult getting it to look exactly the same. But for those of you that want to support, $20 on Gumroad, this file. And also one thing to think about, because people tend to drop off throughout the video, if any of you happen to know any neuro-ophthalmologists, specifically neuro-ophthalmologists, not just ophthalmologists, then feel free to skip on to the end of the video because you might be able to help me. Alright, so let's take a look. The purpose of the Afterglow product is to explore emissive lighting, otherwise known as mesh lighting, and to use it in creative ways to make cool lighting setups, which don't require things like HDRIs. The benefit of this is that it's physically present, so you can animate it around, change the shape in real time, and incorporate things like geonodes. Also, different elements of mesh lighting can be hidden from the camera, and have other elements of ray visibility toggled on and off. So just to demonstrate that here, though we can see these dish lights affecting the cube, there are also additional lights surrounding it which are invisible. So each of these can individually be toggled on and off, and they affect the lighting in the scene. Being physically present means things can be animated around as well, so it's easy to create rigs for the lighting setups that alter reflections on objects. In a lot of cases, you can substitute an HDRI for this, and it will take up less space on the file, depending on how you've set up the meshes, because HDRIs tend to have quite large file sizes depending on the quality. The first thing you'll notice when you open the file is I've got my own version of the default cube, and it's contained of what I call the Studio Light Cage setup. Again, you can hide these dish objects if you want to, that's fine. It's kind of been balanced in a way to make anything look good. Over on the right up here, you can see that when you open the file for the first time, there's a collection called starting point. So basically the idea is you choose what you want to start with, and then you just delete the rest. So if you want to start in a studio environment, for example, we'll jump in here with the camera, and then we have a studio lighting room with a mapped ceiling that we can apply all different types of light effects to. And there's all sorts of hidden control in the materials that I've created here. If you want to do something like a character display, we'll enable the Studio Cage collection, and then go to the Replace Me character, find the camera that's been set up for that, and then you have a setup ready to demonstrate your character. Again, hidden away in the materials of this are different elements of control, which I'll go into, and I've also left a funny notice on the character saying, "Replace me, for I am not a piece of art." The irony being that it is technically a piece of art, but because I have a product for like rigged based characters like this, one thing I've seen is that a lot of people, use the characters without ever replacing them. So it's kind of just a funny note about how if you're going to use this, if you just change some of the lighting color, for example, if I do this and then put that on ArtStation, this is not a piece of art. Like, this is not a new piece of art. This is just my work adjusted. So if you're going to use it, replace the character with something that you've made yourself. For a quick product viz demonstration, we have a product viz one with a camera here. The reason being, I wanted to show what something with reflection would look like, and I have also tested glass here, and it looks amazing. This kind of lower frequency brushed metal comes from my modular metals pack, so you get a little sample of that in this as well. All things are of course procedural, so you can modify the values and see how the results change as well if you want like a really subtle brushed effect. For fun as well, I've also included what I call the medical science template. The reason for this as well is just to remind myself of one of the use cases I wanted to end up using this lighting content for, which is for visualization work. So here we have an example of what a glass material looks like in this lighting setup. I'll show you some customization elements in a little bit as well. And if you're wondering what's inside of this is the cochlea from my right inner ear. So this is the thing which picks up vibrations to give you a sense of hearing, and these canals as well provide you with your sense of balance across various axes. One thing that's quite interesting that you might notice is that the inner ear also kind of looks like a three-dimensional gizmo with the different canals representing different spatial orientations like X, Y, and Z. I just thought it was kind of interesting how evolution has created its own gizmo. So let's talk about some customization here. If I go back to the character, if you do get your hands on this, I recommend playing around with the different material values. So first of all of these objects have been mapped with spherical or circular gradients, and making subtle changes to these can greatly change the final mood of the render. So we can see here we've got something very moody, and the light catcher at the back is picking up some of that light. Additionally, things don't have to be single colors, so if I put in a bit of red, for example, we can see how this is represented on the gradient, and you can of course change the interpolation modes to make things smoother or harsher, depending on what kind of effect you want to achieve. Everything can of course be moved around, and like I said, you can also hide things from the camera visibility. So for example, if I put a dish here and then select this, if we go down to the object properties, then under ray visibility you disable camera. Now of course the emission strength can also be increased and decreased as you need, and if you want to, you can make duplicates of the lighting materials so that if you make changes to one object it doesn't affect all the others. You may also notice, if you've used any of my other startup files before, that the world nodes have been simplified. I used to have a section where HDRIs could be plugged in a more exposed way using multiple nodes. Now I'm not using HDRIs. You'll see there's nothing plugged into the surface because I don't really need them anymore for what I'm doing. This node comes from my Modular Workspaces product, I think. So again, another little sample there from another product, which I guess is another justification for why this startup file is paid. And I want to tell you about a little tip I figured out for character lighting. So if we take a look here, I'll show you a render of Asclepios. Actually, no, I'll do that live. I don't want to give myself more editing work. I'm going to jump to another file. All right, so here I'm in a more in-depth version of what I've just been showing you. So this is actual work for the Afterglow product, and I have a statue of Asclepios. So while I was setting up this lighting template, I thought, wow, this looks really good on statues, but I did figure something out. Statues look great here, and you can add some transmission if you want to make something look more waxy, but that's not necessarily required. But I did discover that if you add a bit of an AO gradient, kind of linearly from top to bottom, that looks better than not having the gradient there. So here we have the gradient, and now we have without. Now this is something that I never figured out before, but I kind of know why. It's because the focus point of this statue is the head, obviously. It's the first thing that people see. So what it does is provide clarity around the focal point. It also kind of simulates additional base lighting, so lighting coming up from the floor, even though we already have that. So what I've discovered is that combining material lighting techniques with actual physical lighting techniques can achieve some really powerful results that are quite difficult to achieve otherwise. So for example, if you wanted to get this AO gradient, just using the lighting, you would typically obviously reduce the strength of the light above, but then you lose things like that lighting at the top here. So it's like, how do you get this clarity gradient across the statue while maintaining the light? You have to use a combination of the lights and materials. So this is a tip / technique that I've bumped into that I'm actually very happy about, and now I dispense this wisdom to you. But of course you can get this material in the startup file and see how it works together. So basically, if you give this clay material to any like sculpt you make, any sculpt of a character, make sure you apply the scale. Suppose you don't really need to, but it probably helps with the values. And then you'll find this section in the material that says adjust for AO gradient. So if you change this value, you're going to see the linear effect of this AO being added. Now this is also adding whiteness, but you can control this by adjusting the color values. So if I change the last handle on this ramp here, we can adjust that. I tend to leave that on something pale. You can match it up with the other colors in the material to make it consistent so that when you adjust it, it only adds the AO gradient as you see there. So rendering tips with Curtis. All right, so let's hop on over to the studio environment. As I said, if you jump into this file and you want to use an actual diegetic studio room like this, then just enable that and then delete the studio cage. And then if you save, it'll make the file smaller again, of course. And of course, because you can save your own startup file, it means you can modify this in any way you like and go to File, Defaults, Save Startup File. So if there's anything you want to change in what I've set up, you can do that perfectly fine. That's one thing I've received questions about in the past in regards to like asset library products. Sometimes people ask, oh, why did you make it look this way? Why not this way? And I'm like, well, you can do that. You just take it, change it. The way I've done things doesn't have to be the way you have to use it. This is Blender. You can open up the file and modify it however you like. So in here, I've got a model of Suzanne, of course, and And the ceiling is actually an object made of a couple of layers. So there's an emissive light layer and then there's a glass layer, and they've been combined into one object. So we can see here on the right that we have two materials, studio ceiling light and studio ceiling glass. Let me find them here. Technically, we could do all of this in one material because we've got the coat layer on the Principled BSDF now that works more appropriately. That was kind of fixed in Blender in a somewhat recent update, but I've done them as two separate objects. But it kind of allows you to get more control over the look. I will demonstrate this. For example, let me put on a colorful preset. Of course, I've added some pre-made gradients for you. And then if I go to the glass, first of all, we have a transmission gradient created by Charon from Just 3D Things. So we can actually control how much light is let through the edge of the glass ceiling. And we can kind of adjust the rounding and smoothness of this as well. But secondly to that, if I increase the roughness of the glass, we can see that the room kind of becomes more chalky or pastel-y. And that's because it's removing reflections. If we leave the roughness on 0, you can start to see some of the flaw in the ceiling there. And it takes slightly longer to render like this, but this just goes to show that you have control over that styling. For the light material itself, there are two methods of mapping. So first of all, we have the linear mapping, which is what we're seeing here, where from one corner to another, we have a color gradient, and you can change it to anything. So if I change the red to green, you can see how that modifies the gradient. But then secondly, I also have spherical or circular mapping. So this would be brilliant for car showrooms, but you can imagine it now. So imagine there being a car there where the Suzanne is. That lighting is lovely, it's pristine, it's very soft, and it's very kind of centrally focused. So that's what I like about diegetic scenes like this. It's very versatile. You just think about how you want it to be, you represent it physically, and then the light is just there affecting the object, rather than creating rigs out of lamp objects to try and specifically recreate a very specific style, which is then difficult to adapt for other styles, or using an HDRI to kind of try and approximate the lighting, and then creating a fake environment around it, trying to balance those values so the HDRI doesn't affect the environment too much. I don't like that. I like to try and do everything just physically simulated because, well, I guess it's more fun, at least for me anyway. So there's different amounts of versatility. So I've got a couple of presets here, and I'm also demonstrating how you can restrict the area of the total gradient with a bit of math node trickery. So after the gradient texture, this gradient here, you can modify its total range. I suppose you could also probably do this through map ranging as well, but I like doing everything through color ramps because we are in the end playing with color. And of course the emission can also be controlled there as well. So there's only a few presets here. For the linear, there's this kind of like biohazardy one for anyone that wants to get a bit weird. There's like a sunsetty one, although I should probably add a bit more blue there. Although I've already uploaded the file, so anything I change here won't change the file unless I upload it again. But anyway, you've got a lot to play with, and I also recommend when it comes to stuff like this, don't just stick to the center of the room. I've done a few cool pieces of artwork where, for example, if we take a side look like this, if I go to the wall material and make this more reflective, like this, for example, Cycles denoising is a bit weird when it comes to distances and super reflective environments like this. You can actually see a banding here. That's a problem with the optics denoising implementation in Blender. There is a way to stop that, but it's not ideal. What I mean by that is if we go to the denoising for the viewport, if we change the passes from albedo to none, it fixes it, but the results are more smudgy and it's not that great. If you do albedo and normal, it almost seems kind of worse. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But that's also why I don't do denoising for the renders. I actually do denoising through the compositor using the denoise node. It seems to give much better results. But anyway, what I was saying is get creative with the space. Like we have here, beautiful, beautiful reflections showing Suzanne being bounced throughout the scene. You have complete procedural control over all of the different values. I really like this kind of sunsetty synth wave vibe that's added with this color styling, but again you can modify everything to your heart's content. So that's just again one thing I really love about this style of lighting. Now I did see some comments on the previous video talking about this where people were saying, you know what, this technique's been around for ages, people really need to learn lighting fundamentals in 3D or even know when it's appropriate to use mesh lighting or to not use it, and that's true. But also I've never been one to strive for efficiency, so my interest is entirely in making something as fun to play with, as exciting results as possible. Now, like I said, this is basically just a limited version of what the final Afterglow product will be able to provide. So again, you can pick this up now for $20 on Gumroad. And again, just to reiterate, because I've never really liked charging a lot of money for stuff, but I will be charging more for products in the future because it's kind of necessary now. I am hoping to raise some money with this for my medical consultation fees. So if you're interested in supporting me and also getting something that's really quite fun and useful back, then link in the pinned comment, I imagine. Also, let me think if there's anything I forgot to go over. For the compositor for the bloom, for some reason, the bloom that I have set up is different in the viewport compared to the render. So let me go back to one of our original scenes. Right, here we are. And I have two node groups in the compositor. One is for the viewport and one is for the final render. Now, when you do render out a frame, the result will be different. For some reason, I don't know why, maybe something to do with like the pixel size. So I've actually got like two node groups. One of them was balanced for the viewport and one was balanced for the render. Try and find a solution to that, but it's just something to be aware of, that the end result may actually look different to how the viewport does. Also, there are other things in this file. I've got a collection of like, workflow tabs, compositor 1 for checking after renders, scripting. In here I've got my old reference for resolutions and frame rates that I've always found quite useful. I've got a double workflow. So this one was actually for like showing images on social media so people can see what the result looks like in the viewport and also what it's structurally like in the 3D scene. People seem to really enjoy that. And I've also got a file data tab. Now this one's quite interesting, especially for people that are making products. So you can see whether there's any like loose data in the file that you can delete easily. I'll probably end up using this more in the future. So if you made it this far through the video, and this isn't technically the end, I'm going to talk a bit more about the personal side in a minute. But if you made it this far, please put some kind of package or box-like emoji in the comments. That will show me if you did make it this far. And as always, I appreciate seeing your familiar faces. Feels a bit like a family. For now, let me tell you a bit more about what's been going on. And like I said at the beginning, if you happen to know any neuro-ophthalmologists or any regular ophthalmologists that have a particular interest in the cornea, then feel free to send this section to them because you might be able to help me out, even though it might be a bit of a long shot. On the 6th of February, I was moving stuff around in this room. It's quite dusty in here. I got my other computer set up for doing additional rendering. On the evening of that day, my eyes were feeling quite dry, and they had been feeling quite dry for the few days prior to that, but I remember rubbing them, and I don't usually do that, but it kind of solved the dry eye sensation. Everything was fine initially. The next day, about an hour after waking up, I noticed that the right eye was burning a lot, but not when it was open. So when it was open, everything was fine. As soon as I closed the right eye, there was an intense burning. Now I thought, okay, that's kind of normal, I suppose, if I've injured it, that's whatever. But then it didn't go away. And it didn't go away for the rest of the day, and it started draining on me quite a lot. It wasn't improving at all. And then the next day came along, and it was still there, and it was persisting. Same strength of burning. And what's really annoying about that is that, if you have dry eye, you close your eyes for some relief, and you might feel like a very slight burning. Okay. Oh, I suppose they were dry. And then you carry on. But this time, you close your eyes for a relief, but every time I close it, that's when the pain is there. So the only relief is to keep your eyes open. So the days went on, and it did not improve at all. And I thought, right, okay, it was really starting to drain on the mood, because everywhere you look says any minor abrasion should go away within like 24 to 48 hours. And that wasn't happening. Additionally, I also very quickly clicked in to a couple of important factors, which was that I had no physiological reaction to any potential scratch. What I mean is my eyes weren't watering at all in response to the pain, and there was no redness, no inflammation, no debris, nothing. Everything looked fine, but my body wasn't reacting to the pain. So even before any of the weird stuff I'm about to describe to you happened, I already clicked into the fact that this may be something nerve related. I ended up going to urgent care when it got really intense to deal with, and the nurse I spoke to there asked to describe what I was feeling and whether it was like a localized sensation or all over the eye. I said it was all over the eye. Like the entire eye feels like it's burning. They took a look and they spent quite a while looking, and they said, interestingly, the only thing I can see is a very small scratch at my 4 o'clock, as they described it. To me, it sounds like the sensations you're feeling are disproportionate to the injury. So they said they expected to see abrasion marks kind of all over the eye, but what they could only see is a very small scratch at the 4 o'clock. Now, this was about 4 days after the initial eye rubbing, so I don't know what it looked like at the start, but at the point of 4 days, it was a small scratch. Now, the really weird stuff hasn't even happened yet. 3 days after this, I went to see my local optician. So 3 days after a tiny scratch was noticed. At this point, I was on chloramphenicol. So that's an antibiotic for the eye, just in case you get an infection. The chloramphenicol was improving the symptoms. What I meant is, when there's something on the eye, the burning sensation stops. So that makes it sound like a peripheral issue, meaning that it's local to the eye. Because if you protect the eye and it stops, that means that it's an eye issue rather than a neurological issue. But we're going to get onto some weird things, which make it also look like a central issue. For example, I noticed that when I rub my left eye, the pain in my right eye stops. then that sounds much more like a central thing than a peripheral thing. But anyway, I went to the optician 3 days afterwards, and they couldn't see anything. They said they couldn't see a tiny scratch, which means that between 4 days and 7 days, it had healed. And now I was still on chloramphenicol, and because he couldn't see anything, he couldn't really provide any good advice. Give me 1 second, I'm just going to close the curtains. So really all he could say was have some eye wipes and make sure you're being good with your eye hygiene, and it should go away. So I was 3 days into a 5-day chloramphenicol course at that point, and I didn't know what would happen after I stopped the chloramphenicol, because there had been dips between taking it where the pain had come back. So you do it over the course of a few hours, right? So you take the ointment in the eye, then I feel fine. And when that starts to wear off, the burning comes back just as strong. So I was initially feeling quite unhopeful about the burning going away by the end, because I had been given evidence all the way through the course that it was not going away. Now I knew that, so when the optician said, try eye wipes, I thought, this is ridiculous. That's not going to do anything. So a couple of days after seeing that optician, I stopped the chloramphenicol, and then the pain came back bad. And when I mean bad, I mean like worse than when I went to urgent care for the initial injury, which doesn't make any sense because the scratch is healed. Why is the pain worse now? Now again, no other evidence of anything. No evidence of infection, no inflammation, no redness, no tearing. Very strange. So I was immediately feeling very dejected. I was speaking to my mum about it. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm really annoyed. But my mum said something about how I keep protecting the eye. I keep keeping it closed to try and basically push the burning down and prevent it from happening. Maybe it's a good idea to keep it open more and blink more to try and let, the natural tears get at it. But one thing I did do on this particular day, which was the 15th of February, 9 days after the initial injury, is I did something that basically convinced me that it's a nerve/neurological problem. As the pain was getting more and more and more intense, I decided to leave my eye open. Now this is pretty much the first time that it had been painful with the eye open. And what I mean is sensitive, like someone sticking a needle into your eye when you've got it open. So think about it this way. When it's open, someone's sticking a needle in your eye. When it's closed, the whole eye is burning. So I kept it open and I used my left eye as a reference. I said, okay, if the left eye feels okay, I will keep the right eye open. So that's what I did. I sat there, I blinked occasionally, and I just let it happen. And it got more and more painful and more intense until I think a kind of like a natural panic started to set in, like something subconscious. And then just as it got so intense that I think it pushed some kind of boundary, something clicked. And my eye finally started tearing, very slightly. That faded really quickly. But after that click moment, the pain dropped by about 80%. And ever since then, ever since that day, it's been more manageable. Much more manageable. So just to reiterate that, nothing seemed to work, or nothing seemed to change the pain, except for exposing it and letting the pain happen. Now after that, things started getting inconsistent. So what I mean is, sometimes when I would hold my eyes closed, everything would be perfectly fine, and then I would open them again, and then like a few seconds later I'd close them and it would start burning. Open them again, close them, fine. So it would be completely random. In the days following that click moment, if I would be at the computer, sometimes I would be mostly okay, except for some slight burning, and then all of a sudden, with the eye open, it would spike up again, like it did on the previous day, and then I would endure it. I would let it get painful until finally it would tear slightly, and then it would do the same thing again, it would drop. So basically this was the process for the next few days. I would let the eye get painful, let it click, and then let the pain drop again. I noticed some other weird things as well. So for example, like I said about how if I rubbed my left eye, or if something irritated the left eye, like if I was in the shower and some water got in the eye, and there would even be just a very faint, very faint, natural amount of just burning from that irritation. Hesitate to even call it burning, but you'll know what this feels like. If you ever rub your eye or get something in it. Any tiny amount of sensation in that eye would immediately just turn off the burning in the right eye. I have no idea why. Also, eating. When I'm chewing on something, like if I'm eating my dinner, that tends to turn off the pain as well. And it's not distraction, because I've done all sorts of testing for this. It's not that I'm being distracted from the pain, necessarily. Maybe that's a component about it. But even when I'm thinking about it and I'm trying to feel it while I'm eating, it's not there. So something about that process is stopping it. Really, the most effective thing has been powering through the pain. So ever since then, the 15th of February, things have been going up and down. They're much more manageable than they were at the highest points of pain, but the sensations have not stopped. So I've still been trying to keep things exposed. I've been trying to be good with the eye care as well, even though I don't think that's really part of the problem. I've been doing all the eye wipes and all that, but it just feels like everything is just masking an issue rather than solving it. So I went back to the optician again. I said, "Hi optician, I'm still having all of the weird sensations, like the weird spiky sensitivity and burning, and the only way I managed to make it better was by actually just exposing myself to the pain. And the thing they said to me was, that doesn't make any sense to me, which is not something you want to hear from someone you're trying to get help from. My optician had no idea about any of that weirdness. And I've noticed a pattern, because this reminds me about the vestibular issues as well, the BPPV, the canal dehiscence, and the vestibular migraine, is that when you speak to a doctor that has a comfort zone with a limited understanding of something, if you lay out all of the weird stuff you're experiencing, if they don't understand some of it, they'll ignore it, tunnel vision in on something they do understand, and then say that is the solution to all the problems, which is not usually the case. So this is what happened at the last optician meeting. I explained what I was feeling. They said, that doesn't make sense to me. They had a close look at the eye, couldn't find any issues, but then noted, okay, well, there's some tiny like dead skin flakes around the eye, so that means you must have blepharitis. And keep using wipes, and also here's some eye drops just in case. Now, obviously, that didn't help. And also, there are no other symptoms for the blepharitis. And even that doesn't explain the weird quirks like, rubbing the left eye stops the pain in the right eye. And it also doesn't explain why the pain isn't strictly related to irritation. What I mean is, if I get something in my eye, like a tiny piece of dust, I can feel it there and then it goes away, and it doesn't increase or decrease the burning pain. It seems separate from whatever's happening physically. I occasionally also get random foreign body sensations. They've been a bit less present the last few days, but they'll either be above or below the center of the eye, and it'll feel really small, like there's something on the eyelid, and when I have a look, I can't see anything at all. The eye wipes don't really seem to help, because I imagine that as you're kind of rubbing the lid margin, you're just irritating the eye anyway. But the only other thing that seems to help is warm compresses. Now, people do that to help with dry eye and to encourage the oil glands to produce more, to stop your tears from evaporating too quickly. But again, this just feels more like masking rather than a solution. My left eye is fine. What I'm doing is, I just feel like I'm overcompensating, running around in circles, trying to soften a problem rather than find a solution for it. And I also need to be careful with the warm compressors so as to make sure that I'm not doing it too hot and I'm not burning my eye, because at the moment I can't really tell if I'm experiencing a burning because of irritation or because of the weird sensation that's been present ever since the injury. So for example, if the burning is a nerve related issue and then I actually injure my eye again, how do I know if what I'm feeling is real or not? Now, for a bit of additional context, I am extremely aware, because I know that if there are any neuro-ophthalmologists that watch this, they're going to be thinking this. This person is anxious and they have central sensitization issues because they keep thinking about the pain. So when it comes to the neurological perception of pain, when you keep thinking about it, you sensitize yourself to it. I think part of that may have been happening when I was keeping the eye closed a lot of the time during the injury. So when I finally opened it, my adaptation to the pain was wildly different compared to having it open. But sensitization to the pain doesn't really explain why exposure improves it, objectively and repeatedly. I'm thinking about the pain, I'm exposing it, and even though I'm obsessively thinking about it, it gets better because of actions I'm doing with a conscious focus. Also, when I've been doing things on autopilot, like playing a game or watching a show, sometimes it's fine, and then sometimes it takes me out of that autopilot. So even when I'm not thinking about it, it interrupts that process. So I don't believe it's a central issue entirely, maybe just partially. Also, for some extra context, I have had issues with my trigeminal nerve in the past, which is the nerve that the eye sends signals through, but it kind of branches off into different areas. So I actually had to have a wisdom tooth removed, not because of an infection or anything, but because I was having quirky issues with the nerve. What I mean by that is, for years, I had pockets behind the wisdom teeth and I had to use this kind of rubber pick thing to clean out behind them. Now, there was no issue with that until about a year ago, or maybe even just under a year, where I noticed that after I would do this cleaning, even if I did it gently, at a delay of about a few hours, I would start getting trigeminal nerve pain. If I didn't do that cleaning, it would go away. Now that became a problem because I need to do that to prevent infection, pericoronitis. I also noticed that applying a chlorhexidine solution would remove the trigeminal pain very quickly, like within 5 minutes of applying it. So there was a delay of a few hours of it starting, and then like 5 minutes to get rid of it. I got the tooth removed, and then because I have thrombocytopenia, which means low platelets, this seems like a genetic thing, by the way, not a result of another issue. My mum's got it as well. I ended up with a lot of intense pain in the nerve for weeks. And now this was only a few months ago. So it gets me thinking whether there's a sensitization issue to the nerve, and that maybe during the rubbing eye incident, I may have done peripheral damage slightly, and then maybe there's a combination of things going on here. But ultimately now, I just have the problem of I'm going to a specialist soon, and it's quite expensive. But this specialist is a corneal injury specialist, which is great, but I still run the risk of speaking to someone who doesn't understand the quirkiness. Again, why does the left eye prevent pain in the right eye? I've done some research. There are things called reflex responses or reflex arcs, where like stimulating one nerve pathway can shut down another for things like pain sensations, but I don't know too much about that. But the one thing I'm dreading is bumping into that doctor pattern again, laying out all the weird symptoms, them not understanding and therefore rejecting the symptoms, tunnel visioning in on one thing they can find and then thinking that's the solution. Doesn't matter how specialist someone is. A lot of people, experts alike, fall into this problem of diagnosis. And it's something I've bumped into many times in the past. I want to find someone that can look at the weird symptoms and go, okay, I don't understand that, therefore it doesn't mean you're lying and it doesn't mean you're wrong. It means I need to find you someone who will understand that. Otherwise, I'm going to have to do what I had to do with the balance problem again, which is figure it all out myself and push my way into getting the right kinds of tests. Like my neurologist I saw for the balance issues knew nothing about it, and well, quite frankly, well, they're not going to watch this anyway, they would kind of gaslight me into thinking that I was wrong, saying you don't have BPPV because only old people get it. That is wrong. If you're watching this, don't ever let a doctor say that. They're just wrong. It's not only old people that get it. They're more likely to get it, but young people can definitely get it. And for me, it seems as though one of the core reasons is an electrolyte imbalance issue. It shouldn't really be that simple. Every time it happens, right, I've gotten incredible at detecting when I had BPPV now. I don't get nystagmus, by the way, when I do the Dix-Hall-Pike maneuver. This is, again, another gaslighty thing, because the medical literature says if you have BPPV, by the way, if you don't know, it's where crystals in your inner ear start floating around the canals or they can get adhered to the cupula. The way they diagnose it is by tilting your head back and then watching how your eyes beat. It's called nystagmus. But not everyone gets that either. So a lot of doctors are misinformed by thinking that if the eyes don't nystagmus, then the person doesn't have BPPV. That's wrong. There are other ways of finding out if someone does have BPPV. First of all, someone might just feel sicky when their head's moved in a certain direction, which is equivalent to the nystagmus. Also, tinnitus appears in a lot of cases in the affected ear. And also for me, I noticed other weird, again, borderline neurological symptoms where if I turned my head in one way, the eyes would go too far when compared to the normal ear. I ended up going through like just so many waves of self-study and testing. Things which made the most difference in that case was coming off lansoprazole. That was the biggest jump down, a bit like how with the eye issue, the biggest jump down early on was the exposure therapy to the pain. So similar to the balance issue, that's one sudden leap that I made in progress. My balance issues weren't completely solved by that. I had to learn that drinking caffeine was making me piss out my electrolytes and that just stopping that isn't enough. So I had to start taking more as a supplement, and then that basically stopped my vestibular migraines. And I actually had one relatively recently, but I almost questioned myself if it was happening because it was the weakest vestibular migraine I've ever had, which means that supplementing is actually working. Now, a lot of people say that take vitamin D, that's the big problem for balance issues. That's like one tiny aspect of a larger problem. I've been taking a electrolyte complex, and I actually think one of the most important ones in there is potassium. I just have a hunch, and I haven't done complete testing on it, but it seems like of all the things, when that was added to the dietary equation, things started to get better. So likewise, I'm in this phase now with the eye issue where, as with the balance, I started to see neurologists to try and get tests to figure out the final parts of the puzzle. I'm now trying to see a cornea specialist to get more tests to try and figure out the final pieces of this eye issue puzzle. For the balance issue, I did not end up seeing a doctor that actually fully understood the problem, and likewise for this eye problem, I don't expect I will find a doctor that fully understands the problem, because as it seems, corneal neuralgia is a wildly unexplored area that affects a lot of people, particularly people that have laser eye surgery. So if you're contemplating laser eye surgery, please be aware that there are a lot of people that go into it perfectly fine and come out with debilitating issues, because though a lot of people's corneal nerves heal back normally over quite a long amount of time, this is just from medical papers I've read, there are also a lot of people that have ongoing, never healing corneal pain and weird sensations because the nerves, as they grow back, don't grow back the same way, and they grow back in weird stunted ways. So if you're considering laser eye surgery, just take a moment and look up all the cases of this happening, because I'm not saying you shouldn't get it if it's going to, massively improve your life, but just be aware there's an underexplored area of eye health relating to pain and sensation that a lot of opticians and doctors of various kinds are not informed about. If the specialist that I'm going to pay to see in a few days has no understanding of the strange sensations and falls back into that pattern I described, then I'm going to have to find people this way, which is obviously not ideal and isn't particularly effective, but that's how it will have to be. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you made it to to this second ending of the video, then consider an eye emoji in the comments as well. Thank you so much for listening, and don't be too worried. Like I said, I discovered a way to make things more manageable. It's distressing, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was. Again, please consider picking up the file. Thank you for your support, and I hope you have a fantastic day.